You gotta mix a little reality in with your imagination to achieve happiness in your life. And you've got to overcome your programming, which in your case is a 30-year-old television show. I mean, come on. Let me tell you a story. I was jogging one evening around my neighborhood, and I came across a house on fire. And the crowd had gathered, and the fire engines hadn't come yet. And the crowd all turned to me and said, "Oh, look, there's Captain Kirk." And this guy came running over. Turned out to be the father. And he said, Captain Kirk, my child's in the burning building. Please, you gotta save my kid. Please go." So what was I gonna do? Argue with him? I was Captain Kirk. So I found myself running into the burning building. Now I'm looking for the kid, and it's the fire and the smoke and the heat. And I got down on my hands and knees because I had seen Rescue 911, and I was crawling around in the dark, and the smoke is in my lungs. I'm coughing. I can't see it, and I'm calling kid. Where are you, kid? No kid. Kid's not answering. I'm calling kid. Kid, no kid. And I'm dying. I mean, the flames are burning me up, so I gotta get out of there. So I'm coughing and hacking. The masonry's falling all around me, and I back out, and I get outside. And there I see the kid, playing on the lawn. Kid had jumped out of the window. Father had caught him. He's playing on the grass. The father's fine. He's playing on the grass. The crowd is playing on the grass. The crowd all turn around looking at me. There's Captain Kirk. They're all laughing at me. I felt like such an idiot. And then I realized I'm not Captain Kirk. I'm not a hero. I didn't have the kid. I felt absolutely ridiculous. But I had to try.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi or cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your pharaoh of physical media, your chancellor of cheerfulness, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That is right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And once again, I am robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the post-geek singularity. And this morning, I have one thing to say. That is, live long and prosper. Ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, kind souls from across these 28 known galaxies, however you identify, from whatever alien race you might think you're from, or perhaps you're not from an alien race at all. You're from the human race. Welcome to today. Today is September 8th. 2020. It is the 54th anniversary of the debut of Star Trek, which debuted on American television 54 years ago with the episode The Man Trap, which, by the way, famously, as everyone knows, was not the actual second pilot. Yes, I won't go over it again, but there was the cage, which introduced Captain Pike and the Enterprise and Spock and Number One, rejected by the networks. The apocryphal story is, or maybe it's true, it was too cerebral for people, which is kind of silly. So, in a crazy bit of television history, they actually commissioned a second pilot, which usually wasn't done very much. It's been done lately. Game of Thrones had a second pilot, or they reshot the pilot, but it didn't happen much then. And of course, William Shatner was recast as Captain James Kirk, not Captain Pike, and they wanted to get rid of the guy with the ears. They retained him. Unfortunately, Majel Barrett's Number One, maybe having a woman as the first officer on the ship, was too progressive at the time, but they tried. Majel Barrett later became Nurse Christine Chapel. And Star Trek was born 54 years ago today with the episode The Man Trap, which aired. Now, today there is also, it's Star Trek Day. And Paramount, always being the innovators that they are, decided to take a page from Warner Brothers and DC's Fandom, and they are putting on their own Star Trek event where they have panels with actors that appeared in each show. The Kelvin universe is not represented, and they're weighing heavily into, obviously, Star Trek Discovery and Lower Decks and Picard, because those things are actually on the air. They're also doing a Strange New Worlds panel, where I'm sure they're going to make announcements we have yet to hear, which is exciting. So what I wanted to do was jump on whatever you think of modern Star Trek. I wanted everybody to have fun and be able to go over to Star Trek Day and enjoy those panels, 3.5 hours of panels. See, it's like being at a creation convention, but you don't have to pay for it. So why not do that? So that happens. It begins at noon, but I wanted to do this show first because how can I not do a show on Star Trek Day? Now, interestingly, you might ask yourself, why did I show that self-serving clip at the beginning with William Shatner? Because why not? It's from my own movie, Free Enterprise. Interesting story about the scene that I showed you. First of all, that scene did not appear in the original version of the movie. That scene appeared in what was released in 2006 as a different version, my preferred version of the film. In the original version, the film was running long, and it was thought that that scene was redundant. There was a scene that comes earlier where Shatner talks about why he wants to do a one-man musical version of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where he plays all the parts except Calpurnia. And he says he thinks he can do it. That's the punchline of that scene. Now, I always felt that the scene that you just saw was sort of the answer to that scene, that even if it doesn't work, even if his one-man musical version of Julius Caesar doesn't work, he had to try. He thinks he can do it, and he had to try. So it was you needed both. And I always thought it was a huge mistake to end that story. Now, that story that Shatner tells is actually based on a real event that occurred to him when, although it had nothing to do with a fire, he went to rescue a child who was caught in the surf and who was drowning. And he went out to save that kid and found himself in trouble. And it made him come to terms with the fact that perhaps he is not the heroic Captain Kirk. He's just William Shatner. And when he told us that story, we're like, oh, we have to put that in the film. But he didn't want us to put it directly in the movie, so we had to sort of paraphrase it. And that's the version in the film. Now, you can also see with Free Enterprise, if you're a fan of it, if you know the film, it was shot in 1.8.5. But in my mind, I was always composing it for widescreen just because I like widescreen. One day I always hope to revisit Free Enterprise and do the definitive version. And now that Coppola's revisited Apocalypse Now and revisited The Cotton Club and is now also revisiting Godfather 2, Francis Ford Coppola, Robert Meyer Burnett, I would really like to do my definitive version of Free Enterprise, and I would like to finish it in the actual widescreen, the proper widescreen 4K aspect ratio, which for home entertainment purposes is actually pixels. It's 4096 by 1716 pixels. That is the proper aspect ratio at 239:1, and that's how it would be sized in 4K. So that's a bit of a taste. I went through the 2006 version of Free Enterprise. You can't even get it unless you have the Anchor Bay DVD that was released. The horrible 4:3 version that is streaming on Amazon is a standard def version that was done in 1999. The version of Free Enterprise that exists, the latest version, is my latest cut of it. I've actually gone through and recut the entire film based on that original 2006 version, and then I've also recomposed the whole movie in the hope that one day I'll be able to revisit the film properly and do a 4K release. So that's a bit of a taste of what it would look like. Now, in my mind, when I was shooting Free Enterprise, I was always in my head composing for 239:1 as opposed to 1.8.5, which is another, it's more, 1.8.5 is more like what you're looking at right now. But I like the widescreen aspect ratio. It's kind of how James Cameron would shoot his films in spherical Panavision. He could always open up the frame when you saw it on home video, so there's more information on the top and the bottom, but usually the information on the top and the bottom is sort of redundant, or it's more open space. But if you look at what Cameron does, he hasn't really shot anything in anamorphic widescreen. He shots in spherical because he has more choices with lenses and has to use less light, and then he recomposes for the 239 or 235:1 frame. So when you watch a James Cameron film, that's how it is. And then on home video, you can do both. But now we have wide gauge televisions and things like that. So it is my fervent hope to go back and revisit Free Enterprise, do it in 4K, and put it into my preferred aspect ratio. Now, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to get the original version available, the theatrical version, on the disc as well, because of course that would be finished in 4K too. So there you go. But that was a little bit of a taste. And the reason I decided to show it is because on Star Trek Day, I guess you have to reflect, if you're a Star Trek fan, what does Star Trek mean to you? Like, why become a Star Trek fan? What is it about Star Trek? Why has it endured for 54 years? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I found an interesting article that was on National Geographic, believe it or not, National Geographic, and it was published on June 16th, 2016, celebrating Star Trek's actual 50th anniversary, which was 4 years ago. So I figured I would jump into that to start, and I thought this was sort of interesting. And I certainly love this headline. Star Trek is right about almost everything. The epic series celebrating its 50th anniversary this year bases its science fiction on scientific fact. Jeremy Berlin wrote this. It was published June 16th, 2016. Resistance is futile. For half a century now, the Star Trek franchise has been winning new fans and inspiring real-world innovators. Over the course of 12 feature films, the 13th will be released next month, and 6 TV series, plus an ever-growing constellation of books, games, comics, magazines, and documentaries, it has boldly gone where no science fiction has gone before. The secret to its success, says Andrew Vasquez, is its allegiance to science fact. Or is it Vasquez? Vasquez, a National Geographic writer and astronomy blogger known as Night Sky Guy, is the author of a new book on the series' reality-based astronomy and prescient technology. In Star Trek, The Official Guide to Our Universe, he explains that unlike most sci-fi, the franchise has always rooted the innate human urge to explore in plausible science, providing a hopeful pathway to a human future that's not too distant. With Star Trek celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, National Geographic recently spoke with Vasquez about the real science and enduring appeal of the series. You're a science writer, amateur astronomer, and lifelong fan of Star Trek. This book, you say, represents a sort of Vulcan mind meld of those passions. Tell me a bit about how and why it came together. I've been an amateur astronomer, a backyard stargazer, since I was 10 years old. At the same time, I've always been a Star Trek fan, so I knew I wanted to mix these two very different worlds together, but I wasn't sure how. Then I began to realize that in Star Trek, most of the astronomical objects and destinations have real-life counterparts. Watching the TV show and movies, you hear names like the Andromeda Galaxy and Alpha Centauri, real things I've come across in my own travels across the night sky. I soon began to find many instances where I could reference the series in terms of an astronomical object. Like if I would show someone a supernova through my telescope, I could quote the Star Trek episode in which it appeared, and I could say, remember in all our yesterdays when the Enterprise had to rush away because the impending explosion of the star would destroy the planet? The planet's Sarpedon, if I might add. About 10 years ago, I began to make a casual list of all the astronomical objects that have appeared in Star Trek, and as I went through the episodes, I saw again and again that the writers were always talking about real-life stuff. They were always taking real science seriously. Tell me about your methodology. I imagine it involved a lot of research and collaboration with scientists. How did you decide to focus on and explicate? Star Trek is a fire hose of information and trivia. It's overwhelming, so I decided that I needed to focus on a few things. Coming from an astronomy education background, I knew I needed to make it easier for the reader, to make something they'd be familiar with, a guidebook to the night sky. We'd start off with things in the solar system, then we move on to planets outside the solar system, the exoplanets. Then I'd explain the stars, where they're born, how they live, where they die, and finally I'd get around to the grandest structures of the galaxy. The cornerstone of this book is looking at the destinations and true science of Star Trek. Scores of today's scientists and engineers and physicists, as well as mathematicians, chemists, even astronauts, were inspired as children by Star Trek to pursue these fields professionally. The show captured their imaginations, and that's what's so cool about Star Trek. I mean, I'm not dissing Star Wars, I like that too, but I find it to be much more fantasy-based. I liken Star Wars to Lord of the Rings. Star Trek is more of a realistic vision. Well, I'm not going to read this whole article because you kind of get the gist, but I thought what was interesting about that is, and by the way, I'm putting the article in the live chat, what I thought about that was so interesting was the idea that Star Trek was indeed a realistic vision. And I was thinking, I'm like, what is it? Like, for me as a child, I started watching Star Trek according to my mom. She says 3, but that's impossible because it wasn't in strip syndication until I was like 5. So I was like 5 when I watched it. And I was obsessed with the show. Like, we're talking Rain Man obsessed. It's not like maybe I didn't have to watch Wapner every night, but I kind of had to watch Star Trek. And it was on every night, every weeknight at 6 o'clock on Channel 11, which is our independent station growing up in Seattle. And I loved it. I mean, I loved it. And I've often wondered, like, I don't have any recollection of how I started watching it. But even then, I was a huge fan of the astronauts. I love the astronauts because at the time, we were still going to the moon. And the last time we landed on the moon was in 1972. That was the last time Americans landed on the moon. So as a little kid, up until the time I was 5, there was all kinds of astronaut iconography. I mean, it was real. We were landing on the moon. And so Star Trek, I can't tell you, but I would assume that there's something to do with the fact that we really were going to the moon at the time that led me into Star Trek, I would imagine. And also at the same time, I started seeing movies. I've told people that on Channel 11 Sci-Fi Theater, I remember seeing War of the Worlds when I was 5. Maybe I was 6, misremembering. It's a long time ago, obviously. And I was obsessed by War of the Worlds, the movie. I couldn't believe it. It blew me away. As I've told people, my best friend growing up was Catholic, so the idea that the Martians kill a priest in that movie was part of the forbidden, the way it looked. Even that movie, War of the Worlds, like Star Trek, was incredibly colorful. And I think that was part of the attraction for a kid, is the original Star Trek was designed, part of the conception of the show was to sell color TVs. Because believe it or not, color TVs were still pretty much a novelty back then. Not a lot of people had them. So the networks were trying to make shows as colorful as possible to make them attractive to people who bought new TVs, to make shows like Star Trek one of the things you would watch if you had a new color TV. And if you hear from fans in England, for instance, they were still really broadcasting. A lot of people I know from England, when they tell me when they first watched Star Trek, they watched it in black and white. And that's not to say people in America didn't either, because a lot of people did. But I think we had a big color TV in our house because my grandfather he owned a big furniture store. And at the time, his 10-story furniture store in Tacoma, it was called Schoenfeld's Furniture, by the way, they had an electronics department. So we always had pretty good electronics because my grandfather could get them for us wholesale. He wouldn't remember it for us wholesale, but he would get us electronic equipment wholesale. So we had a big TV downstairs, big color TV, and I think that's where I watched Star Trek. That had to have been part of the attraction, was color. The color was so vibrant. The fact that they made the brilliant conceit of having command sciences and support with gold, blue, and red. Remember, red tunics were not just security. They were not just cannon fodder. Red tunics were also, Scotty, engineering, the support services of the ship. So that was a big deal too. Now, one of the things that I think was really attractive to me as a kid growing up was the Star Trek, while it did have episodes where there was introspection with the characters, and you learn things with the characters, famously things like Amok Time or The Naked Time, when people started to get a little wacky, No Beach to Walk On, all of that. But really, pretty much it was about pretty well-formed characters that were moving forward together to solve problems. And I think one of the interesting things that I liked as a kid was I recognized that, I had friends that I liked to play with. We all liked to get together in groups. We would go do things. And I kind of saw as a kid that Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were friends. They were this group of guys. They were friends, and they were having adventures like we would make up in the backyard. And they would go places and have really crazy things happen to them. And when you're a kid, you're trying to grasp these things. I mean, even before I had taken science or understood what an amoeba was, or the fact that there's all kinds of single-celled creatures or in a tablespoon of water, I didn't understand what a single-celled organism was. But when I watched Star Trek, the idea that there's a giant 11,000-mile long space amoeba, I mean, these are heady things for a kid to wrap your head around, and you kind of understood it. And again, the giant space amoeba was awash in color, and it was so interesting to see, and every episode was different. You never knew what was going to happen, and it wasn't for a while, probably after a couple years when I realized that there was not an endless supply of Star Trek episodes. They would be repeated, and then I started to develop favorite Star Trek episodes, and when they would come on again, I would recognize them. I didn't know their names yet. I don't know if I registered when I was 5 the words that came on the screen. How am I supposed to know what Requiem for Methuselah means? Or Who Mourns for Adonais? I don't know. And by the way, when I was a kid, yes, it was Who Mourns for Adonis. It wasn't until I really developed my reading skills or started reading Bijo Trimble's concordance to see, okay, it's not Adonis, it's Adonais, or Adonais. Who Mourns for Adonais. And, these were revelations that you would make as you were a child continuing your education. And then other things started happening when I was a kid, too, is that, I built model kits. I loved airplanes, and I collected Dinky and Corgi toys from the UK, metal toys, metal spaceships, or mostly jet fighters or tanks or something. And I loved all kinds of miniatures. And then, of course, there was that famous AMT model kit of the Starship Enterprise, which I built 10,000 of when I was a kid. And then, of course, as I grew older, I think it was 75 when they re-released the kit with other decals. People have told me it's earlier, maybe it is, but I don't seem to remember getting the kits. I don't seem to remember them releasing all of the decals until after the Franz Joseph Technical Manual came out. And that was other things. When I was 8, the Star Trek, the Franz Joseph Starfleet Technical Manual came out, and the blueprints. And what was so significant about those blueprints, which I think cannot be not misunderstood, but cannot, the Starfleet Technical Manual and the blueprints, while they came with covers that said Star Trek on them, when you open them up, the whole conceit was that they were from in-universe. They were from the 23rd century. And even though, obviously, they were books and on paper and they weren't computer documents, back in 1975, what were you going to look at something like that on? There were no computers. There were, but they were millions of dollars, and they were in, the Rand Corporation or something. But there were no computers. So when you got something like the Franz Joseph Technical Manual or the blueprints, I lost my shit. I pored over those things because, no one told me. I didn't understand what canon was, and I didn't know what licensed was, what was canonical, what was non-canonical. Anything that had Star Trek on it was real to me. You couldn't tell me that, well, Rob, that's not really canonical. Well, okay. No one was going to tell me that when I was 8. The 3 years I'd become a huge Star Trek fan. So getting the Franz Joseph Technical Manual, where you saw, you got the names of all the Constitution class heavy cruiser, to understand that, it's not a starship, it's a heavy cruiser, and there's a destroyer, and there's a tug, and there's a scout, there's a dreadnought, all of that stuff was in, and suddenly my love of Star Trek expanded. It wasn't just what I saw on TV and would go play in the playground at recess at school, make up in my own mind. There was all of this information that was right in front of me that was put in book form that I could memorize. And so my experience of Star Trek leapt beyond the screen. It was on now the page, and then there were books, like obviously my father, I've told the story about how he would read the James Blish novelizations of the episodes. They were collected in Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, Star Trek 4, those books. But then there were novels like Spock Must Die and Spock Messiah. And more novels came out a little bit later, but having then the Gold Key comics, which were weird, and even I knew back then, I'm like, did they ever see this show? Well, I found out later, no. The artists who were drawing this, the Gold Key comics, had not seen the show, which is why fire was coming out of the shuttle bay. Then, there were model kits, obviously, the Enterprise, and then when the Franz Joseph Technical Manual listed all the names of the ships, whether it was the Potemkin, the Congo, were these mentioned? Did you see these? Sure, in the Ultimate Computer, we had things like the Lexington and the Excalibur. We had things like that, but there were other ships, and how cool was that? And during Star Trek, one of my favorite things was when they came across another starship. The Defiant disappeared. The Constellation, poor Constellation. Whenever they came across another starship. Ron Tracy's ship, his ill-fated ship. Too bad, huh? And it's It was just the way the universe expanded and could live in your imagination was all a big part of it. And another thing that I loved about Star Trek was that I believed it. I believed these things because the stories that were being told seemed to be real. And of course, Star Trek did lead me down the primrose path of I loved science fiction. So I started reading science fiction books, and actually Star Trek novels were sort of my gateway into reading. But the stories that Star Trek was telling seemed real to me, the way people reacted. And I started seeing like, oh, if somebody's in a bad mood, they might act like this. So I started to learn about adult human behavior from Star Trek, and it made me sort of not fear adults. And it was something I would every time I watched a Star Trek episode as I got older, I would notice something new, or the reason I would start to understand people's methodologies and what was it about this show? Like why I couldn't get enough of it. And then of course, before 75, you had the animated series from 73 to 74 and 22 episodes. And while even I recognized back then that the animation's not so good, because I had been going to the movies, my parents had shown me they would re-release Disney films, and I'm like, why can't Star Trek look like a Disney movie? Why does it have to look like paper cutouts that somebody's like moving one step up from clutch cargo? But I didn't care because it was Star Trek, and the stories were good, and the voices were the same. It was William Shatner. It was Leonard Nimoy. And it was, it was just something that took hold. It was literally the thing that, it was my imagination foundation is what it was. That's what Star Trek was. And then something else that I have to mention is that Star Trek grew and evolved throughout my entire life. It's still growing and evolving even now. I dare say lately in the last 10 years, Star Trek has devolved, but up until then, it was evolving. So most of my life in my formative years, as a kid, I loved Star Trek, but then as I was moving into my teen years, something happened that I never would have thought possible, and that Star Trek came back. And again, I've talked about this before, but Star Trek the Motion Picture was absolutely one of the most insanely magical and awe-inspiring things that ever happened in my life. Sure, it was post-Star Wars, and Star Wars did change my life. And it cemented my love of science fiction and made me want to make movies, because in the wake of Star Wars, there were shows like The Making of Star Wars that showed you all kinds of things, how movies were made, blue screen, model spaceships. I mean, so it was Star Wars that sort of it solidified my desire to make movies, but it was the stories that I wanted to tell or continue to tell that was the real attraction. So it was a combination of the two, but Star Trek was really, it began my love of storytelling. So when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, and now it seems quaint because people talk about, it's the slow motion picture and all this. When it was coming out for me, there was never going to be another Star Trek. And it seemed, and at the time, of course, because of the development cost, the fits and starts of Philip Kaufman's Star Trek Planet of the Titans with Toshiro Mifune as a Klingon, that never happened. The Star Trek Phase 2 television series, 13 scripts were commissioned, sets were built, tests were shot. That never happened. Because of Star Wars, Paramount decided to turn In Thy Image, which was going to be the pilot of the Star Trek Phase 2 TV series, into Star Trek the Motion Picture. But to get Star Trek the Motion Picture, and it had canonical fealty to the original series. I mean, sure, only 5 years had gone by instead of 10 years, but the Enterprise was souped up. People were in a different place. And for a kid that spent half of his waking hours imagining the Star Trek universe, Star Trek the Motion Picture, to me, was really the first time you'd seen the revival, not really a reboot, but the revival of a franchise where they took into account the intervening years. And it was so mind-blowing to see your characters. Like, I don't know nowadays, we've seen things like the X-Files movie, and of course, they brought Mulder and Scully, the same characters, back. But back then, it was pretty amazing. Now, I know there was the Batman movie and then the TV series, but this was pretty extreme. And then they took the characters, the fact that they had aged into consideration. There was really no pushback. I mean, they figured, okay, because Star Trek really began its popularity in earnest starting in 72 when they had the first conventions and strip syndication, and people could study the show and watch it over and over and over and over again. So there was this entire fan base that really had never existed before, not like that. So, pretty crazy. I mean, it was a pretty heady time to grow up to love anything. I mean, I did read Lord of the Rings, and I liked all those things, and there was a lot of fantasy, especially in the wake of Star Wars. A lot of stuff, the Sword of Shannara and the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, and there was all kinds of things that were exploding. But Star Trek was always my one true passion. And then, of course, going into junior high, and I was in junior high when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, then junior high and high school, had the Star Trek feature films come out. When I got to college, Star Trek The Next Generation started all the way through college, and then into my 20s, it was Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise. And as I grew as a human being, as a person, and had these experiences, there was new Star Trek. There's new Star Trek even now, obviously, over the last 10 years. But the difference is that over the last 10 years, Star Trek has either gone back with the Kelvin timeline. We met Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as younger men, which I never bought. I didn't think the movie, while people like it, for me, as a lifelong Star Trek fan who has had these characters ingrained in my soul for so very long, from the time I was a kid, to go back and see this story, especially when there have been books, there have been Star Trek novels. Now, remember, the best of the Star Trek novels are part of my headcanon. Just because they were novels doesn't mean they weren't great Star Trek stories. Same with comic books. You know, there were some great Star Trek comics that were written by Star Trek novelists and even Star Trek television writers. And a great Star Trek story is a great Star Trek story. There's this weird, I mean, the idea that, well, you know, it's just marketing materials and they don't count. This is something that has been perpetrated recently. Because when I was growing up, I mean, obviously the movies were the movies, and sometimes you'd have wacky things happen, like the DC Comics Star Trek series had to account, they were running a Star Trek series, and then they had to figure out how are they going to account for the time between Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3 and 4, I mean, the time between in the movies, and then they would have to reset things to bring them back into accord with the films. It was kind of wacky, but fun nonetheless. But to me, Star Trek hit a wall with Star Trek 2009 because it stopped innovating. You know, you're going back and you're watching the Kelvin timeline movies, and you know they're playing the Beastie Boys, and Kirk is bored, and Spock is angry, and none of the characters they seem like riffs on other people. Like Kirk has now become another pop culture figure. He's Maverick from Top Gun. He's not James Kirk. Especially when you even read Shatner's novel he wrote with the Reeve Stevens, Collision Course. Far better story about Kirk and Spock meeting at the Academy than we got in Star Trek 09. And, you know, you wonder, why didn't someone just read that book? You know, and things happen, but whatever. I mean, I don't want to, it's Star Trek Day. There's no reason to bash. You've heard me bash on Star Trek. But the last 11 years of Star Trek, to me, I think the show has devolved. I think Star Trek, the franchise, has devolved, and it's become more of a brand name, and they're not, as I've said, the stewards of the franchise now have decided to go their own way. And it's different than my experience growing up with Star Trek, because there was always new Star Trek that pushed the universe, the mythology, everything forward, even Enterprise. Which was a prequel, the idea of the founding of the Federation, something we'd never seen before. I hope that would delve into that, because that would have been interesting. And again, you're adding to the tapestry of the Star Trek universe. And while some of it was okay, they were not allowed. The show was compromised of all the modern Star Trek shows because, you know, they wanted to tell a geopolitical story that was the first season would be set on Earth, and the first season would end with the launching of the NX-01 with the Enterprise. But they weren't allowed to do that because the network didn't want them to do that. They're like, no, you have to get the ship into space. And I'm sad about that because I wanted to see the West Wing in space. That's kind of what I wanted, something like that. But we didn't get that. But anyway, so that's my background with Star Trek. So I figured, you know, let's celebrate Star Trek Day today and let's enjoy it. If you love the franchise, great. There's so much of it to like. Hey, if you're new to the franchise and you're watching Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard, you're getting something out of it, more power to you. I very much recognize that a lot of people's first experience with Star Trek was the 2009 film, and that's not wrong. I mean, let's face it, there are people born every day, and there are going to be people that rediscover the Star Trek franchise every single day. I rediscovered it, or discovered it for the first time when it was in strip syndication, and I was 5. And then I was in a rarefied position that as a fan could watch it grow and expand, and sometimes it was good and sometimes it wasn't good. And I will say this, when I was a kid, a lot of people talk about how people hated Next Generation when it was on. I never hated any Star Trek. I think the first time Star Trek 3 the first time I was ever disappointed by Star Trek in any way, shape, or form was Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And that was because I'd read Harv Bennett's story treatment that was much bigger canvas, bigger story, and I was bummed out. And Leonard Nimoy's directing, while it was, let's call it, journeyman-like, again, you realize that sometimes perhaps actors don't have the best handle on the very thing that they've been in because they only experience it as actors, where really, you want people that are immersed in the fictional universe of it all. But that's whatever. I mean, that's part of the history of Star Trek. You can debate that until the cows come home. I did write a snarky article for Sci-Fi Universe magazine, how Star Trek First Contact, which I wrote with my friend Dave Hargrove, how Star Trek First Contact is the worst Star Trek movie. Why did I feel that way at the time? I didn't necessarily really feel that way, but I wrote the article because I felt Star Trek First Contact rehashes ground that was well-trodden already, and it does not expand from a storytelling standpoint. The Borg, it added a female villain, which sort of diminished them in my mind, but that's okay. And the last 11 years of the entire franchise has I think, not moved forward. And unlike the article in National Geographic, there's not a whole lot of real science happening when you have spore drives and tardigrades and people that can fly through space without spaceships and whatever. It gets a little tiresome. I think modern Star Trek is more along the lines of Star Wars in that it's fantasy-based as opposed to science-based. But that's kind of the way our entire civilization has gone. We're all living in these crazy fantasies of ours, and we have a very difficult time being pulled back down to the ground and believing in science. We all want to believe now in what we feel. And what I think is weird, I think that's a good thing, but why not begin with science and then talk about what we're feeling or how we're feeling about it? But there you go. There's my thoughts on Star Trek Day today. If you would like to add in, you can always throw in a tip or a super chat and we can talk about it. But before that, I have letters from you. Oh, first of all, people have asked me I told the story yesterday about how I met Christopher Lee working on Lord of the Rings and the poster that I took with me. To recap, I knew I never get autographs from people I interviewed during my DVD work. And there was a lot of it, whether I was working on the X-Men movies or Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings. I never, ever got an autograph except once. And that was when I interviewed Christopher Lee when I was working on Lord of the Rings. I went to London. I had a 5-hour interview with him. And I had bought a poster at the Cannes Film Festival in 1999. This poster. And this is the poster I have now. It's now framed on my wall. This is the Dracula Prince of Darkness poster. And I had it framed and matted because the poster is yellow and red. And it's a photo poster, not my favorite. But I did. And then when I took it there after the Christopher Lee interview, to the horror of all the Brits, the camera crew, and especially the makeup girl, you are not going to ask for his autograph, are you? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And you can see it's kind of in the middle of the poster, right underneath his outstretched hand. Here is where Christopher Lee signed it. To Robert, my best Christopher Lee. Sorry, I didn't give you a better picture because the light, it's inside the glass. I couldn't get it before I went on today. So there you go. That was what I was talking about yesterday, and that's the poster. I mean, come on. You're meeting Christopher Lee. I mean, I've been watching him the whole time since I was since I was a little kid. Hammer horror. He was in an episode of Space 1999. I've got an action figure of him from Space 1999, and now I've got his spaceship right over there. So I had to have that. I had to get it signed. You know, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Got to do it. Well, anyway, let's see what people have to say today. And because it is Star Trek Day after all. And there's a couple of really good letters, I have to say. This one comes from Jared Snyder. Jared says, Dear Rob, belated congratulations on your 500th episode and looking forward to the next 500. I first heard you on Midnight's Edge and followed you back to the ROBSERVATORY sometime around episode 300. Star Trek, The Prisoner, UFO, Amelie, La Ventura, Do the Right Thing, John Frankenheimer, the MCU, the Hyperion Cantos, Dune, and of course The Hills Run Red. As you say, now available on Blu-ray with 6 hours of bonus features, all in one shuttle bay. I was hooked. While work often prevents me from participating, I listen live most weekdays and greatly appreciate the insight and commentary you provide. On weekends, I listen while working in our orchard. I love that. Your openness and fairness has created a wonderful community where I can talk Stratomatic baseball with the chairman, share my love of Screaming Lord Sutch with Joey Koch, and watch the latest videos from Deutschland and gather pearls of wisdom from Willow and her mom. Best wishes to Elizabeth and you. Hashtag release the toys. Jared M. Snyder, project manager by day, music historian by night. Well, what a nice letter, Jared. Yeah, you know, it's fun to talk about all this stuff and have people dig it. I mean, I'm sure some people, half the time I'll make references to things people are like, huh? What? But a lot of that has to do, I mean, Star Trek instilled in me, I think, a thirst to just know stuff. You know, it's funny that some of my favorite characters in fiction, James Bond and the crew of the Enterprise, like James Bond just knew everything about everything. He knew how to chill champagne. He probably knew how to, well, he knew how to drive cars. He knew how to fire every gun. He could fly planes. And I think that Star Trek and James Bond and all the things I liked as a kid instilled a thirst for knowledge. So I've never outgrown that. There's always something more to know. And I've always heard, I heard when I was a kid, I don't know when I heard this for the first time, but somebody said or I read or something that it was never good to think that you knew everything about a certain subject. Because if you thought that way, you'd stop thinking about that subject. And it's always best to leave your mind open so when you read about a subject you think you know, you're open to new interpretations of that thing or new ways of looking at that thing. And I've kind of felt that way about life. And people, too, by the way. I mean, you know, you never get tired of meeting new people, learning new things. I mean, the planet Earth, how can you ever be bored? You know, when I was a kid, my parents got me the World Book Encyclopedia. I've told this story on the show before, but I couldn't get enough. I mean, I read the World Book Encyclopedias forward and backward. When I was a kid, didn't matter what I just loved reading the World Book on every page. It was like, wow. When I came back from school, I remember in the second grade, I've told this story too, but I'll tell it again. My mother, I would have to tell my mother and father over the dinner table every single thing I learned that day. And finally, my mother, who was so exasperated, told me to shut up. It's like, I can't imagine how annoying I was as a kid because, of course, they already knew all of these things. And I'm like, do you know how multiplication works? Yes, Bobby, we do. I can't even imagine. But that was all because of Star Trek. So I appreciate that you like the wide variety of subjects. And, of course, I have now been recently called the Master of Tangents. I don't know what that would look like. Maybe I'll have Xevious or somebody come up with a picture of me. What does being the Master of Tangents look like? I don't know. Julian Mushkin is here. Julian says, hello, Rob. Having had a blast once again interacting with you and some of my fellow PGS members on Saturday's Zoom meeting, I just wanted to take a moment in between my longer letters to fire this off to further voice my appreciation for your creation of the post-geek singularity. I was delighted when you felt the urge to question my daughter, Alexandra, but at the same time a little embarrassed as she proceeded to be a typical preteen and feign indifference to the whole thing. As I have mentioned before, at least on the Facebook PGS page, she is herself an imagination connoisseur. Both my wife and I have taken delight as she shows increasing interest in our shared fandoms like Star Trek and Stargate SG-1. Always good to have a newly minted imagination connoisseur amongst your flock. It can only help the world be a better place, so kudos to you both. And I took no offense that if you can get through to one girl, preteen girl, I don't know how that can be done, but it's a tough one. But she didn't just walk off, not immediately. I first came to your YouTube channel back in the first season of your shows by way of seeing some mention of Axanar in the description of that day's content. You may have been refuting some of the allegations Alec Peters was hurling at you. I refute them all, by the way. I don't know why somebody... I find it strange that every single person, practically, that worked so hard on Axanar for years ends up in his sights and lawsuits, and he's cost me a lot of money. I mean, we got kids to feed. I'm like the cab driver in Total Recall. I got 2 kids to feed. And Elizabeth going to school and all that, and frivolous lawsuits based on all the work that I've done. How much money do you owe you, Alec? Well, here's all the work that I've done for you. Let me show you. Sue me again. I'm going to put it all online. I wanted to hear both sides of the story, as I was pretty disturbed by a lot of things I was hearing from the Trek fan film community online. Anyway, I don't intend to drag that all up. I just wanted to explain how I came to your channel originally and why I decided I needed to stay. To paraphrase a certain Tom Cruise movie quote, "You had me at I love Star Trek." You've already read my letter about my love of Star Trek. I think it's clear that we park our shuttles in the same shuttle bay. So you had me with Star Trek, but you sealed the deal when you waxed rhapsodic about your memories of seeing Star Wars at the UA-150. Every time you reference that event, I find myself with a huge grin on my face. Seeing Star Wars at the UA-150 is also a cherished memory for me as well. That theater, by the way, the UA-150 theater, which no longer exists. As a matter of fact, I saw it when it was a pile of rubble, of bricks. The UA-150 theater was a theater on the corner of 6th and Blanchard in Seattle. It was also right across from the King Theater. And when Star Wars opened, 6 months later when Close Encounters opened, there were still lines for Star Wars. And the lines for Close Encounters and Star Wars would stretch down either side of the street. And the street they stretched down, if you went to the next block, that is where Amazon's headquarters is now. The big geodesic domes. And anyway, that's where the UA-150 was, and it was a great domed theater. It had this golden dome, not unlike what you see in Israel, but it in the Holy Land. But it was a theater that had this giant curved screen. I mean, this big dome on the inside. It was split level and curved. It was this gorgeous. And to me, it really did. It felt like it was a holy place. Like you would go in, and it felt very church-like. It's my favorite movie theater of all time. I love going in there. I saw Star Wars there 11 times. I saw Empire Strikes Back there 26 times. I saw a ton of other movies. Its sister theater that was next door, the UA-70. I saw Dawn of the Dead there. I saw Alien at the UA-150. I saw Big Trouble in Little China, Buckaroo Banzai. I mean, it's endless what I saw there. And every time you went into that theater, even in the marble-floored lobby, I mean, it was this huge lobby, huge bathrooms. It was this grand theater. And, you couldn't not see a movie there and have... The first time I saw Star Wars there, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. It was the Sunday after it had opened. I tried going on the Saturday, but we couldn't get in because there was too many people. I'd never seen lines for a movie ever in my life until then. That theater is indelibly seared into my mind for no other reason than that was where I first saw Star Wars. Rob, I had never seen such a crowd for a movie before. Stretching around the block and snaking up the street, you and I have the exact same memory. We parked and walked to the theater, and the whole time I was fretting that we wouldn't get in. I didn't get in the first time, but the second time I was fretting that I wouldn't get in. We went 3 hours early, though. I thought we still had to get tickets. We'll never see it. But the Force must have been with us that night as we walked by the line of people and went straight into the theater. It was like magic, but at the same time, I thought we might be doing something wrong. How was it that we could just go in before all these people were waiting outside? Tickets bought well ahead of time? I will have to assume that was it, but I was 11 and not privy to parental plans. The auditorium was packed. I had to sit by myself down near the front and off to the right side, not an angle I like to view a movie from, and have avoided like the plague ever since. But once the picture started, from first to last, I sat wide-eyed in wonder at this marvel of a movie. From the preamble, story crawl, Star Destroyers, lasers blasting, hyperspace, lightsabers, the Death Star, the Force, X-Wings, and TIE Fighters, oh my! I was hooked. These are my memories of that first viewing, and every time you have related your memories about it, those are the things I remember with such fondness. I find myself wishing that during those years of our shared Puget Sound residency, we had met at an event. We might have. I went to all of them. I mean, anything that was going on in Seattle that had anything to do with movie screenings, the Seattle International Film Festival, up till I left in 1988. I mean, my teen years, from the time I was 10, when I started riding metro buses, to the time I was, 20. Well, literally, I left Seattle right after my 21st birthday. For those 11 years, if there was a major science fiction film thing or something, I was there. So we might have seen each other. In a different reality, I could have called you friend. That, by the way, is a reference to Balance of Terror from the first season of the original series. I don't intend to get all creepy fanboy here, but I do treasure the fact that you have given genre fans a forum to talk about these fandoms we will all treasure, and for them to share their thoughts and memories with each other as well. Thanks, Rob. Yours in fandom, Julian Mushkin. Well, Julian, what a very nice letter. Thank you so much for that letter. I have to say, one of the interesting things, and I can't reiterate this enough, but Seattle was an amazing place to grow up as an imagination connoisseur, because there was a lot of movies that we got in Seattle, things launched in Seattle, Dutch movies, for instance. I met Paul Verhoeven when I was 16, seeing a screening of his movie Flesh and Blood, talked to him for an hour. My newspaper, for my high school newspaper, I wrote a film column, and I was able to meet directors and actors, and it was pretty incredible. People like Richard Rush brought The Stuntman up, and I think The Stuntman had its world premiere engagement in Seattle. A lot of movies came to the Guild 45th Theater, and we had per capita more theaters than most cities in the country. There was the PSST, the Puget Sound Star Trekkers, which was one of the largest fan organizations growing up. We had the One Reel Vaudeville Show, and they put on the Sci-Fi Expo every year. We had comic book conventions. There was NorwestCon. There was a lot of things that were going on in Seattle, and I think a lot of that did contribute. I don't know why Bill Gates formed or started Microsoft. Why was it in Seattle? We had Boeing. There were a lot of things. Nordstrom started in Seattle. Starbucks started in Seattle. There was a lot of things that I don't know what it was, but stuff going on in the PNW, the Pacific Northwest, especially in the 70s and the 80s. It was a great place to grow up and be a genre fan. So you obviously benefited from that the same way that I did, which was great. This next one comes from our friend Calvin Bowes. Dear Rob, last week Braxton, that's Calvin's young son, Braxton's 5 or 6 now, Braxton and I did something we'd not done in 6 months. What did we do? We went to a movie in the theater and saw New Mutants. It was a strange experience. We went on Friday night, opening night, and there was no one there. The only people we saw were the employees. Not only did I not see anyone in the auditorium, but we saw no one on the property. Braxton and I were not afraid of COVID-19 because there was no one to give it to us. Well, that's strange. What a weird feeling that must have been. I mean, was it post-apocalyptic? Was it like being in a post-apocalyptic movie? But good on you for taking your son there. I'm glad. I hope you were safe. It sounds like you were. And there was nobody there anyway, so what a bummer. But what did you think of the movie? Was that Braxton's first experience of an X-Men film in the theater? I would imagine it would be, unless you went to see Dark Phoenix or Logan. But he would have been a little too young for those, I think. Guy Broyles? Guy Broyles is here. Guy, how are you? Hello, mighty RMB. First and most of all, I hope you and yours are doing well. So this is my second letter into the Burnettwork, and I was pleased when I heard you read the first one on the show. I'm the guy whose feelings were hurt because you said you wanted to punch someone in the face. Laugh out loud. I'm only kidding when I say that. Sort of. If you only knew how out of character that would have been for me a couple of years ago, the reaction itself and recognizing and admitting the reaction you get an idea of how much I've changed my way of thinking. It's been a conscious effort, in no small way inspired by your infectious general. So a simple thank you is the least I can do. Okay, on to a more lighthearted topic and the reason I'm writing. I'm sure you get plenty of fan letters with ideas and suggestions for channel content. I suppose one more can't hurt. Worst case, I got to say hello and thanks. So I know that list shows have kind of been done to death here on YouTube, but I think you could put your R&B spin on this one. It could have been done in several ways. A weekly show, whatever you have time. Could have different subjects every show. Could be a top 10 or not. Could depend on the subject. We're fans mainly because we enjoy watching and listening to you talk movies and other pop culture. That is exactly why those types of shows are, and there's a reason why list shows are so popular. After all, because people like them and they get clicks. As OG Burnettwork fans, of course, we're always rooting for the channel, watching you giving your take on my 5 best directors of the 70s, or my 10 best science fiction films ever, or my 5 most film industry-changing movies ever. You could be clear that it's your opinions. That's what we tune in for, after all. Instead of 5 best, it could be my top 5. You could ask fans for input on what topics they'd like to see. We could vote on a few of your choices each time. The possibilities are endless. I feel this is exactly up your alley, and you and us, your fans, could come up with some dope subjects. Or there's a high possibility that I'm not saying anything that you haven't already considered and gotten similar letters from other fans. Just thought I'd throw that out there. However much of a long shot. It's been something I've wanted to see ever since I followed you here from co-hosting Heroes. Thanks for all the great content, and keep up that positive vibe. Your friend and fan, Guy Broyles. Well, Guy, that is a very nice thing for you to say. Look, I'm not going to lie. You know what I want? Not Hot Toys. I really want that 100,000 subscriber YouTube plaque. Now, it takes a long time to get to 100,000 subscribers. I look at Twins, the new trend. These 2 kids that were, not kids, but they're in college, who are reviewing movies. Reviewing songs or doing song reactions. And I was watching them because I love their enthusiasm. And I love the fact that you got young people looking at all different kinds of music. So I've been watching them from the time they started. I don't know why they popped up. And then they did their In the Air Tonight video. And they went from having like 40,000 subscribers to having 500,000 because it got picked up and went viral. Now, I'm not going to lie. I got jealous because I want to get that YouTube. When you have 100,000 subscribers, YouTube sends you a metal plaque. People do different things with it, like Davey504, the YouTuber. He turned it into a guitar, a bass guitar, which I thought was cool. And I think that at the rate because obviously this show isn't for everybody. There's a lot of people, judging by how they treat me online, that think I'm a douchebag. I understand that. But I think you're right. I've never really laid into increasing my subscriber base, but I do think people are always saying to me, Rob, can't you do something short? Can't you do something kind of bite-sized? And we're going to start to do that on the channel. Elizabeth is going to do a Free the Toy show, the fully articulated show, hashtag Free the Toys, where she's going to open toys, and they're not going to be live. I'm going to do it like, 10-minute chunks, small bite-sized things that people could do. I think doing my top 5 or top 10 actually is a really good idea. People ask me that a lot, just because I talk about so many different things, like what is it you want? What is it you like? And the thing is, if people know that I'm not saying like these are the best top 5 things, these are the things that I like, and make it more personal as opposed to here are the 10 greatest science fiction films ever made. I don't want to make those claims. I can only tell you what I like. So maybe, I think that's a good idea, Guy. And I think, stay tuned. I should do that. I think that is a fine, fine idea. This one comes from Jason Webster. Hi, Rob. I hope you and all members of the Post Geek Singularity have had a pleasant start to the week. I would like to take this opportunity to ask whether you received a letter I sent regarding Asian cinema over the last decade. I don't remember it. It is a subject close to my heart, as one of my first jobs after graduating from university was a 2-year stint reviewing Asian theatrical and home entertainment releases. If you didn't receive the letter, please let me know and I'll send it again. Send it again. I'm a huge fan of Asian cinema. I have been my whole life. So, whether it's Asian genre cinema or drama. I grew up watching Kurosawa movies, and then, of course, Ozu films, the art house stuff. And of course, Kurosawa didn't just make, for every high and low he made, you could watch Seven Samurai. He was just a consummate filmmaker. But I'm I'm a huge fan, so send me the letter. When asked to name my favorite films, it gets kind of time-consuming. As like most people, I found I have a list of 35 films I would consider my favorites. Interesting. Over time, there are just so many that have become classics and immensely entertaining to watch. Someone may start with a list of 10 films as their favorites before they know it. And before they know it, the list is expanded to 60 to 80 films. Yikes. Such lists can change rapidly from day to day, week to week, or year to year. It would be easy to name films that are instantly recognized as great films and say those are your favorite films. However, one must really consider films that speak to him or her on a personal level. Or they. Or as I like to say, I, me, or mine. However, one must really consider films that speak to him or her on a personal level. There can be numerous reasons. You might like the acting, production design, or the style of a certain director. It may be because the structure of the screenplay tells the story well. The film may suit aspects of your personality, or it elicited an emotional engagement from you that holds profound resonance. It made you laugh, scream, or cry, afforded the opportunity of a nostalgic reminiscence of an era in your life. Viewing film is a subjective experience, so one should never be afraid of loving a film or films that go against convention, or for loving films that may not have mass appeal to the public. No one can tell a person their reasons for loving such films are not valid. We're free to love the films we choose as our favorites. Taking everything into account, I've chosen a narrowed down list of films by genre and subgenre. Without further ado, here's my list of my favorite films. Science fiction, Blade Runner, Star Wars. Action adventure, The Villainous from 2017 and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Ooh. Action drama, Mulan 2009 and Mulan 2020. Horror, A Tale of Two Sisters in 2003 and The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. Kaiju films, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla from 2002. Thriller, Lady Vengeance from 95 and North by Northwest. I have the Vengeance trilogy on Blu-ray. Fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and The Painted Skin, The Resurrection from 2012. Historical period films, Ichi, and then Memoirs of a Geisha. Ichi meaning like Ichi the Killer? Which, by the way, come on, man. Ichi the Killer action figures. No one ever comments on them, but they are rare. Wuxia Films, Hero, Jadaike, you know what? I'm not pronouncing it right, but Shinobi, Under the Blade, and Twilight Samurai. Twilight Samurai is really good. Wuxia Films, Hero and the Assassin. Comedy, Young Frankenstein, A Shot in the Dark. Teen comedy, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Romantic comedy, Crazy Rich Asians. War, A Bridge Too Far. Western, Tombstone and High Plains Drifter. Bond film, Thunderball. Animated feature, Ghost in the Shell and Sleeping Beauty. Comic book films, 2002 Spider-Man and Batman Returns. Ooh. Martial arts, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Police Story, 1985. Cult films, Flash Gordon, and Blind Woman's Curse from 1970. Oh my God, Robert, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you, what is your favorite film from each of the major genres? Oh my God. I hope you and the wonderful members of the Post Geek Singularity enjoy the remainder of the week. Sincerely, Jason Webster. Dude, I couldn't even begin to answer that question put on the spot like this. I'd have to really think about it. I really would. So I can't answer that right now just because I have to think about it. But plus, you know, when I think about those things, like science fiction film, God, I mean, my favorite science fiction films, it's hard for me even to say because I'd have to really think about, you have to go to your list. I mean, I can tell you some of my favorite science fiction films are like Forbidden Planet and War of the Worlds, like from the 50s. I love those films. Of course, I love the original Planet of the Apes, and I love 2001: A Space Odyssey. But there's lots of other science fiction films that I particularly love that I wouldn't say are the best, like you said, but I love them. Like, I love Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. Do I think it's the best? No. And of course, who doesn't love Blade Runner? And I love Star Wars, but I think I love Empire Strikes Back more than I love Star Wars. But then I have to recognize how mind-blowing Star Wars was. I mean, I can't, like, I get into arguments with myself to say, if someone said, okay, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? I mean, Star Wars changed my life. It showed me something that I never thought existed before. But then again, so did Alien. But Star Wars had already come out, so I already knew it was possible. that your mind can be changed, but Alien combined my love of horror and science fiction. So it's tough. I would have to sit down and martial arts movies. There's so many martial arts movies that I love. I'd really have to go in and think about it. Like, I would feel bad as much as I love I say the Rad, but the Raid and the Raid 2 Barandal. I love the Raid films. Would those be my favorite martial arts movies? I mean, I like fantasy-based martial arts. I like cop thriller movies as well. I don't know. It's tough. I mean, where do you go? Does Bruce Lee, if you don't have a Bruce Lee movie, then if it's a Jackie Chan movie, then it's a Jet Li movie? I don't know. You know, it's tough. So I don't know if I could answer these questions. Not yet. I'd have to think about it. But I think it's a good idea. Maybe as part of my top 5 lists. But a great letter, nonetheless. Thank you for writing in. A terrific, terrific letter. This one comes from Richard H. Happy Star Trek Day, Rob and fellow imagination connoisseurs. On this day, I'd like to share my Star Trek Discovery story, as I am reminiscing on it myself. Also thinking back on seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture in a theater just about exactly a year ago, which ended up being an extra special screening in and of itself. Not only was I finally seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture on the big screen, my grandfather had passed away. Ooh, I'm sorry to hear that. Just days before the screening, and he may have, if not directly, indirectly introduced me to the Star Trek universe. He was a pretty spiritual and cosmic guy, and if I may plug his book, Godfather of Time, you can plug his book, Godfather of Time, and I'm going to put the link to Godfather of Time in the live chat, because why not? There you go. It's a hard book to describe, a mixture of the spiritual and science, and he and his wife's communications with the beyond. Check it out wherever books are sold. I'm a little biased, but I found it quite fascinating. Also, comments on our future lying in the exploration of space. He had a VHS of First Contact on his shelf for years, and I would be just mesmerized by the lenticular cover as a kid. Always curious, but never fired it up for whatever reason. It wasn't until years later as a teen that I finally decided, I'm going to watch this thing. I did, and I really liked it. I don't know if I was a Star Trek fan yet, but I definitely love this movie. I'm surprised I didn't go looking for others, but this was before I knew about IMDb and before I even knew how many movies there were, how much Star Trek there was in general, and how long it had been around. So years pass again, and it's not until your favorite movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, was on the horizon that I decided I'm just going to watch all the Star Trek movies before it comes out. I had seen Star Trek 09 when it came out. For whatever reason, it didn't quite work for me. Good man. At the time, I had fun, but I remembered coming out of it slightly disappointed and didn't know why. You're a good man. I'm sure you have many reasons, laugh out loud, but I'll come back to this film in a sec. So, surprising myself after being lukewarm about Star Trek 09, I had just enough hype for Into Darkness to get me to want to watch all the movies. I also realized my library had all of them, so I was just like, perfect. I don't even have to go look for them. Something was telling me to watch these movies now. I'm excited to start this journey, but not fully knowing what to expect. I'd not read up on any reception of Star Trek the Motion Picture, nor was the YouTube movie opinion space as it is now, so I was going in pretty fresh. I pop it in, press play, and my life is immediately changed. I'm basically instantly turned into a Trekkie as soon as that overture starts. For whatever reason, I get really, how would you describe it? Ghibli. And the score is incredible, by the way. I still don't know how this happened, just the magic of the movies, but not only was I giddy, I felt a strong sense of nostalgia. I wasn't born when this movie came out. I never watched Star Trek as a kid. I only know of it in the zeitgeist and just that one VHS First Contact cover. The movie was casting a spell over me, and I was just in awe of the shot. I later found is considered drawn out and boring to so many, along with a lot of the movie where Kirk is on his way up to his ship and we see the Enterprise in all its glory with that incredible score, and it's just such a beautiful scene, and it just lets you really take it in the same way Kirk is within the scene. And I'm feeling the regalness of this majestic ship that I've only seen in, I don't know, commercials, toys, pictures. I felt the history without knowing it, and I still adore that scene. You know what? That might be the best description I've ever heard of that scene. Everybody always makes fun of that. I mean, it's so funny to me that once people have complaints about things, the complaints become part of the zeitgeist, and no one ever forms their own opinions. You never hear anything new about it. Oh, yeah, that scene where Kirk sees the Enterprise, it lasts like 20 minutes. Star Trek, the slow motion picture. Like we've never heard that over the last 40 years, or 41 years now. But you, sir, you just described it in an interesting way. I like that. all of its glory, because you take it the way I took it. And it's funny to hear that you'd never seen Star Trek before and you felt the same way. Because, you know what? I think that all the great pieces of art, they are not subjective. There is an objectivity to all the great art that can be recognized. You know, it doesn't mean you're going to necessarily recognize it right off the bat, but it affected you. The way that scene was supposed to work, objectively work for you, even having never seen Star Trek before, which proves to me, there you go, you've just proved to me the point that movies are not, people's opinions are subjective. People's feelings about certain movies are subjective. Same with art. But that doesn't mean the art itself does not have objective greatness in it. Whether you recognize it or not is immaterial. But there is, I think, objective greatness in great art. And you, sir, just described it. So I'm all the way through, and the movie ends, and I feel like I've just went on a space adventure with these guys, characters I've grown quite fond of. Yet rarely does this happen with a home viewing of a movie. So I was hooked, and I was in, and I was stoked to see the next movie, and the next, and so on and so forth. I'm trying to remember if I went weekly or daily per film. I'm thinking it was more or less a daily thing, because I couldn't wait to watch the next film. I was so immersed in Star Trek, it's possible I could look back at this time period if I'm old and delusional and probably think I went on space adventures on the Enterprise itself. I love them all on some level, but I think Star Trek 4 might be my favorite. I just couldn't believe how funny it was and how absurd the story was, yet still works so well and is just a good time to watch. The world looked different when I went outside after watching these movies. My perspective was changed. Maybe about halfway through the franchise, I was at Walmart and saw they had 2 box sets of all the Star Trek movies, one with the originals and one with the Next Generation, and they were on sale. Star Trek again with the lenticular covers calling me, each box with the franchise starship beaming like a hologram. It was calling to me. I was like, screw the library, I need to own these. I know I'll be watching them again and again, and so I did. And finally, after watching Nemesis, it hit me. I finished watching all the Star Trek movies. It was bittersweet. It was something I wanted to do for a long time, accomplished. But also, no more Star Trek movies. But there was light at the end of the tunnel. A brand new Star Trek movie was about to hit cinemas in just a couple weeks. But I still had one movie I wanted to give another chance after getting all caught up. Star Trek '09. I popped it in to be surprised I enjoyed it far more after getting my Star Trek fix, which is interesting as it seems the other way around for a lot of people. Non- or new Trek fans seem to enjoy the new films more than the diehards. Now, I was just beyond excited for Into Darkness, and you'd think I was just asking for disappointment. Believe it or not, I loved it. It was just so great to be back in that Star Trek world again, but on the big screen. I actually thought the Khan twist and Kirk and Spock swap was interesting. I see now why it was not the best execution or choice, but I still enjoy the movie anyway. I'm somehow able to enjoy Star Trek new and old as a whole. I always had been a Star Wars over Star Trek fan before this, and I immediately realized, unfairly so, because by default I'd never really watched any Star Trek and may have judged the book by the cover. I always thought the aliens and Spock and so forth looked so weird, but I didn't listen to the story they had to tell. And to my surprise, after watching all of it, Star Trek versus Star Wars, who? I love them both. Trek rose right up and sat real comfortably right next to Star Wars, no problem. This not even touching the TV shows, of which I'm more sporadic with my watching and maybe should really hunker down and watch them in order from the beginning one day. Star Trek at the movies looks uncertain at the moment, but I look forward to whatever comes our way when it's time to revisit Star Trek on the big screen once again. Live long and prosper, Richard. What a great letter, man. It's always interesting to hear how people discover Star Trek, and that, my friend, is a fine letter. And thank you for writing it in. It was very interesting to hear that from you, hear that perspective. This one comes from Christopher McCullough, our friend Christopher. Mr. Burnett. Well, Rob, the last time I went outside, an ominous synth track didn't start up as I prowled the vacant and trash-strewn byways of my way to scavenge supplies, careful to avoid any kind of encounter with another of the potentially infected, so things might just be getting back to normal here in Washington, or what passed for normal 6 months ago. Oh dear. I'll try and make this as apolitical as possible. I sympathize with people who tire of the constant and specious competing political diatribes that make up much of pop culture commentary these days. But when talking about Star Trek and how its vision of the future has changed, the conversation can't be totally avoided. Science fiction comes in many forms, and for this letter, let's put them into a few camps. speculation on what the future might look like, usually a reflection on a paradigm shift occurring in then current society. I would count most cyberpunk in this category, as it extrapolates a future of multinational corporations taking more power from less and less relevant nation states, coupled with the endless anarchic possibilities of the virtual world. Allegory of society. Nobody likes being told they're a party to a corrupt system, but by showing you a heightened reflection of that corrupt system, science fiction stories can make it possible to experience introspection, looking into the mirror. This is maybe the most common, from episodes of The Twilight Zone to all the YA. All of it. Aspirational. The most pertinent. This is the science fiction that does what is most difficult. They treat us as the Neanderthal progenitors of a more perfect world in the future, with every aspect of our society not taken for granted. Where most stories work with a hard limit on human evolution somewhere around 50 years in the future, aspirational stories don't usually worry about what our society looks like now, likely because speculation on our near future tends to be grim. So instead of speculating on what our society might look like in the future, they create one. From Stranger in a Strange Land to Star Trek's vision of humanity in the future, these are the stories that mean the most to me and often have the longest lasting impact on their audience. Before I go on, let me make one thing clear. Political engagement is important. Cynicism is death. Democracies live and die on their informed electorate. Clear? Okay. Now, something that should go without saying amongst us futurists. Politics is bullshit. It's boulderdized economics. It's derivative of political science, which itself is derivative of philosophy and economics, these most rational disciplines. As someone who isn't afraid of Marxism and, depending on my mood, might take on that moniker, I'd be the first to say that the great political dialectic of the last century, whose sides calcified during the Cold War, ended the socialist camp pretty definitively, leaving us with something that is becoming clear: politics that have atrophied since their development was arrested with the development of the bomb. This atrophy has manifested as something called postmodernism, a term with no real meaning but serves as a catch-all for a broad swath of movements that, instead of furthering the dialogue of politics and philosophy, deconstruct ad nauseum established systems of thought, deconstructing past work to create something new. Sound familiar? It's times like these that science fiction is an important way of viewing our society and our future. Unfortunately, the big tent franchises, instead of moving the conversation forward, have now turned in on themselves. The future of Star Trek was evergreen. It wasn't about the technology they're using or the quality of the special effects. The future of Star Trek is about the society that exists. Its members no longer have superstitions. They have elites, but no social stratification. People strive to better themselves without petty avarice. It's the aspiration of the society that comes after ours. After capitalism, after communism, after democracy as we know it. Its politics haven't been invented. They have no name yet, except for us, utopian. And it's a world whose beliefs I personally try and live by, whether or not I believe they can be realized. Here, sir. Mr. McCulloch, that is exactly correct. I love that, what you just said. I love this paragraph. You know, I love this paragraph so much I'm going to read it again. It's times like these that science fiction is an important way of viewing our society and our future. Unfortunately, the big tent franchises, instead of moving the conversation forward, have now turned in on themselves. The future of Star Trek was evergreen. It wasn't about the technology they're using or the quality of the special effects. The future of Star Trek is about the society that exists. Its members no longer have superstitions. They have elites, but no societal stratification. People strive to better themselves without petty avarice. It's the aspiration of the society that comes after ours, after capitalism, after communism, after democracy as we know it. Its politics haven't been invented. They have no name yet except for us, utopian. And it's a world whose beliefs I personally try to live in, whether or not I believe they can be realized. Man, that's exactly what I think. That's exactly the kind of headspace I'm usually in. I live in the utopian civilization that I'm hoping we will eventually reach. That's what I believe. That's what I walk around. That's my headcanon. I'm walking around thinking, yeah, this is Star Trek. I'm living in the Star Trek world. At least that's how I try and live my life, imperfectly as I might be doing it. But it's a world whose beliefs I personally try and live by, whether or not I believe they can be realized. What a great idea on this Star Trek day. Thanks for that. As a kid, I didn't come to Star Trek with one show. My dad was a big fan of the original from watching the show growing up and had some episodes on tape, not to mention the movies, and TNG was still re-airing with Deep Space Nine on right after. So while my preference as a kid was for Picard, I grew up with those captains together. But my interest sort of dropped off precipitously with every subsequent show, and I think the reason for that is how much the tenets of Roddenberry's Starfleet were viewed more and more as constraints to the type of stories they were interested in telling. My experience with the online shows is even more limited, but it seems the aspirational aspects of man's future has given way more yet, and with Picard now, not just in prequel versions of the future, but in the future's future too. Deconstructing something aspirational in order to prove how unlikely it is is too cynical for me to be interested in, and hopefully something they'll think better of in the future. Hang on, let me read this again. My experience with the online shows is even more limited, but it seems the aspirational aspects of man's future has given way more yet. And with Picard now, it's not just in prequel versions of the future, but in the future's future too. Deconstructing something aspirational in order to prove how unlikely it is something too cynical for me to be interested in, and hopefully something they'll think better of in the future. Bruh. That is an encapsulation of why I can't fucking stand the last 11 years of Star Trek. You said it, sir. Christopher, somewhere between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge and full of hot air. That's how he signed off. Well, Christopher McCulloch, that is a fantastic letter. Your letters are always fantastic. And thanks for that. Boy, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. This one comes from Stephen Goggin. Dear Rob and listeners, one of my favorite hobbies is DVD hunting in charity shops, car boot sales, and in gaming stores. Usually I get 2 to 3 DVDs every other week, but this week I was in a charity shop and I bought about 14 DVDs for £25. 4 were standard DVDs and the rest, 5 were Blu-ray DVDs, 5 were normal Blu-rays, and 5 were 3D Blu-rays. And here's the list of what I've bought, starting with standard DVDs. Princess Purple Rain, Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, Short Circuit and Final Fantasy, the special edition widescreen edition with the see-through slip jacket. The normal Blu-rays I got were Knives Out, Ant-Man, Minions, National Treasure, True Love Never Dies, the sequel to The Phantom of the Opera, and Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows. Robot Overlords, Ben Kingsley and Gillian Anderson are in this movie, and I have no idea what it's like. In the 3D Blu-ray section, I got the following: Top Cat, Jack the Giant Slayer, Man of Steel, and I bit the bullet on the last 3D Blu-ray, Avatar. I'm not a fan of the movie, but it was in the 3D format and selling for £2, and my money's going to charity, so I thought, why not? I do not have a 3D DVD player, so I thought this would be a good excuse to get a region-free player that also plays 3D format, so I ordered a Panasonic DMP BDT 280 EB player that plays 3D and upscales DVDs to 4K, and it's region-free. Man, I'd love to get that player. I've not yet got this device. I'm expecting it to come along on Thursday, and I'll let you know how my Blu-ray 3D experience will go with this device and what I thought of the movies I bought. That's all for now. Live long and prosper. Stephen Goggin, the Irishman in Somerset. Stephen, I would assume you know this, but you didn't mention it. You have to have a 3D TV to watch 3D Blu-rays. Just saying. I don't want to burst your bubble or anything, but you do need a 3D TV. It's probably a silly thing to say. I'm sure you have one, but I just thought I'd mention it. Ian Samuels is here, ladies and gentlemen. Ian Samuels says, Rob and fellow Robservationists, Disney have been churning out live-action versions of the animated classics for a few years now. Lion King, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, and so on. have been divisive. Many Disney fans have hated these live-action versions. Of course, plenty have loved them. But one planned live-action that has been put on the back burner for now, and that is Pinocchio. So why has it been delayed or possibly scrapped? Because another live-action Pinocchio is on the way to Netflix. Yes, Mexican writer-director Guillermo del Toro, who brought us such greats as The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth and the simply sublime The Shape of Water, is bringing us a dark stop-motion animation musical Pinocchio. There's also a brand new live-action Pinocchio that has been made that's in Europe. I think that, Life is Beautiful. Why am I drawing a blank? That he made too. That's coming out. Sounds interesting. I've enjoyed much of Del Toro's work, and if anyone's going to make a truly dark look at a beloved fairy tale, I reckon he's the man to do it. Or Tim Burton. But no, I'll take a Del Toro Pinocchio over a Burton Pinocchio. Netflix is still coming up with the goods. We will see. Ian. Well, Ian, I'm excited about that too. Anything Guillermo del Toro is going to do, I will do. Let's see. Darren McKinnon is back. Hey, Rob, okay, Darren McKinnon sent us the Grandizer photo, and he also sent us this painting he did of the Iron Giant. Look at that. How cool is that? But I did ask him. He said he did shark paintings. And I asked him to send me one because what does that look like? So, wow. Okay, so he sent me a shark painting. And if he sent me a shark painting, that means you get to see a shark painting. So as I read this letter, I am going to put his letter. I'm going to put his painting up. So we've seen, there is his Iron Giant painting. Here is Darren's shark painting that he sent me. Ooh. Now that is lovely. Of course, I just accidentally, let me get back to this and go to, get back to his letter, which I foolishly put away. So this is what Darren said. Darren McKinnon. Hey, Rob, you wanted a shark painting? You got a shark painting. Here's my Thresher shark at sunset. It's 2 feet by 2 feet in oil. There. Now that's out of the way. I'll write about Star Trek on Star Trek Day. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is the official artwork for Star Trek Day. I will not comment on what I think is wrong with it, but here you go. Star Trek Day, doesn't it feel a bit made up? Like in The Simpsons when some greeting card executives come up with lovely day in order to generate sales, but whatever. It's hard for me to put into words how I feel about Star Trek as a whole since the Great Divide of 2009. I've watched the new films, I've watched the first 2 seasons of Discovery, and I've watched 5 episodes of Picard. I can't watch Discovery anymore, and the less said about Picard, the better. It's easier to destroy something than to build upon it, and even more difficult to repair serious damage. It may take years, a generation, or it may never come. It reminds me of the political situation in your country. The recent damage done to certain institutions will last for many years. I will not be watching Season 3 of Discovery nor Season 2 of Picard. I will, however, continue to rewatch the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Pretty much anything in those shows is better than pretty much anything since 2009. I remember not being overly impressed with Enterprise during its initial run. Since then, I've purchased it on physical media, as all the other series, and I've watched it more than once. Now, for whatever reason, that series wasn't as beloved as the others, but if you rewatch it now, it holds up. It's Star Trek. We could nitpick at a lot in Enterprise, but that's all it would be, nitpicking. If one were to sit down and critique Discovery or Picard, nitpicking wouldn't suffice. You'd have to tackle the basic flaws in the philosophy of the shows and obviously underline the serious lack of hope, sense of reflection, wonder, and decency brought forth in these new custodians of Star Trek. I never once told myself that Enterprise or Voyager was trying to force anything upon us. They presented us situations and allowed us to think about them. I remember asking myself, what would I do if I were Captain Picard, Kirk, Sisko, Spock, or Worf? How would I feel if I were torn between 2 civilizations like Odo? How would I treat the EMH if I were part of the Voyager crew? Would I put my career on the line like Captain Picard did when he stood up for Data and Lal? What would I have done in Captain Sisko's shoes when he had to work with Garrick to bring the Romulans into the war? Do you compromise your principles in order to get home quicker from the Delta Quadrant? Those are the questions that stay with you. I have no such questions originating post-2009 Star Trek. So, for now, we'll have to content ourselves with the old stories, rewatch them, talk about them, and share them. Just like Captain Picard did when he shared the oldest story there is, the Epic of Gilgamesh, with Captain Dathon. We must find goodness and hope in the deeds of the crews led by Kirk, Picard, Sisko, Janeway, and Archer. I remember watching whole scenes where there is serious debate without resorting to violence and killing. These days, where's the subtlety in the dialogue? What happened to goodness? And where are all my theatrical actors? Ugh. The only bright point in Discovery to me was Anson Mount and his performance as Captain Pike. But now that I've said that, it pretty much guarantees that the character will also be destroyed in the new series. I'm trying to come up with something good to mention about Picard, but I can't think of anything. This letter's probably too long. Let me say this. I've been watching Star Trek Lower Decks. I was apprehensive, but tuned in anyway, and I have to say that despite being prepared to once again be disappointed, I'm still watching. Maybe without knowing, I'd adopted the corrected attitude toward the animated series. I agree with you that it isn't real Star Trek, it's like a send-up, but it feels as if the show is put together by people who get Star Trek, unlike Discovery or Picard. I get the sense they like Star Trek. It feels as if it would be something I would come up with. If they asked me and a group of Star Trek friends to poke loving fun at our beloved mythology, nothing serious, but respectful. Am I giving it a break simply because it's animated? Maybe. But maybe that's the point. Rob, thanks again. Peace and long life. P.S. I didn't find a gallery on the ROBSERVATIONS website where you suggested we share images. Yes, we had a little website meltdown, and that gallery will be, in fact, coming back. So the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery will be coming back soon. But I would love to have your work up there because it's great. And so the 3-word reviews, but the gallery will also be up. And thanks for writing in. Great artwork. I love your letters. And yeah, I'm glad you ended with Lower Decks because I didn't want everyone to be bummed out. But hey, great letter. Thank you very much. This last letter comes from Duncan Norris. Duncan Norris, and then I'm going to go to your live questions, chats, and things. Hi, Rob. Returning with another kinda, sorta, but not really review for my latest trip to the cinema. Is it bad that I know you're probably going to sigh a little when you read that, Rob? This time, my subject is dealing with the second biggest box office film of 2020 that I suspect many of the post-geek singularity know very little about. I do too, but I've been dying to hear what it's about. The Chinese war film, The 800. For those of you who don't know, The 800 has been the #1 box office film in China. It was neck and neck with Tenet when it opened, but The 800 has been crushing it at the Chinese box office. Now, as ever, I'm going to do my best to avoid spoilers. An argument could be made one cannot give spoilers for a depiction of a real-life event whose outcome is known. Yet outside of China, I suspect the events depicted are not common knowledge, and as such will be fresh to most viewers, and I wouldn't want to lessen the experience of anyone who wants to go in blind. None of the trailers I looked at on YouTube do the film justice, and they spoil many of the better moments. Some of these trailers make The 800 seem like a thoughtful look at war, others like a Chinese action film, others a surrealistic depiction of events or propaganda. It certainly has many of these elements, but it's not what the film depicts. To avoid ruining the experience, I'll give a very broad story overview, the opening moments, and one scene to juxtapose. The bases are this. In 1937, the Japanese army has overrun Shanghai, and the last rearguard action by expendable troops is being fought to slow them down at a heavily defensible building bordering on the foreign concessions. That's it. That's the whole plot of the film. The movie starts with green reinforcements coming in from the countryside to defend Shanghai, unknowing that the city has already fallen. They encounter the well-trained Japanese soldiers and are mostly killed. Those who aren't and flee are rounded up as deserters by the remaining Chinese soldiers in the city and shot. This war is stark, brutal, with no soft edges. The Japanese won't use artillery to dislodge the last Chinese troops as they are too close to the foreign concessions and cannot risk an incident. The concessions are considered extraterritorial parts of their home country, and the Japanese don't want to antagonize the Westerners, so the entire fight and film is literally backdropped by a neon zone of partying, safety, and plenty just across the canal from the besieged Chinese troops. Would this be like what was going on in Empire of the Sun when you had the Brits having a great time? I'm sure that's what it was. So, wow, I really want to see this now based on your description. I can't wait to see this. This is an excellent movie. The best war film I've seen in quite some time. It is roughly the same length as Tenet, but far more engaging. Unlike the latter, I was totally caught up in the drama, excitement, and tension of The 800. It is unrelenting and unflinching in its depiction of the events, has interesting and engaging characters, yet without any of the cliches one finds in most cinema of this kind. It is based on real events and makes no attempt to sugarcoat things or skip over uncomfortable truths. It is extremely violent without ever being gratuitous, as paradoxically cruel and uncaring as a lion eating a gazelle. If you like a great story well told, history, or war dramas, then this is an obvious choice to see. Very highly recommended. It should go without saying, but just in case anyone has any doubts, the film is mostly in Chinese and has subtitles. More Asian cinema in my next review, if desired. Until then, I remain your obedient servant, Duncan. Well, Duncan, that sounds great to me. That goes straight to the top of my list of movies that I must see. If you have any reviews of any kind of foreign cinema, I am welcome to hearing about it, because that's how do we learn. And I don't care what movie. I don't care what movie, from what country, where it comes from. If it's good, I will watch it. So thanks for that. Let's see who's here today. Let's see. Wow, there's a lot of. Anonymous says, I'm going to be pissed if a studio ever again gives a director with an original concept that isn't a prequel, sequel, or remake $200 million that leaves me walking out of the theater bewildered, thinking for hours about what I just saw. I don't know, man. I think that would be desirable. If a studio gave you $200 million and you made something that left the audience a bit perplexed, that's a $200 million art film. I'm in. I mean, I'd love to see a $200 million version of Last Year at Marienbad, whatever that format would take. Or form it would take. Bring it on, or the past, any of Antonioni's movies. Hell, for $200 million, we could remake the entire Ennui trilogy and do something crazy with it. I would love to see that. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, do you happen to know when Disney has Avengers 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 34, 57, and 109 planned so I can structure my movie-going schedule accordingly? I don't. Man, I just want to see Black Widow and Eternals. I really want to see Eternals after listening to Chloe Zhao's, the director of Eternals. She's burning up the charts. She has a movie coming out she made after Eternals, apparently. And, wow, I just want to see Eternals. I'm so excited. Willow says, I don't mind Lady True being a villain in and of itself. Okay, Willow is talking about the fact... She's talking about Lady True, my favorite character in the Watchmen TV series, and of course she's Asian. And I said I thought there was a bit of yellow peril for all the talking about racial equality and everything in Watchmen, unless you're Asian, in which of course you're turned into a horrible villain that has to die. Willow says, I didn't mind Lady True being a villain in and of itself. My main issue with her depiction is that she's an interesting character with a complex history that's ripe for mining, and I felt she got really dumbed down in the series finale. You and me both. And I thought it was the worst kind of racial stereotyping. I mean, not she being a stereotype, what they did to her at the end. Willow goes on to say, I get the criticism of Watchmen for villainizing a Vietnamese woman who's a victim of imperialism. I don't think True was actually intended to be seen as the villain. However, the fact that people read it that way is a failing on the creator's part. I wanted her to win. I really did. I wanted Lady True to win. I understood that's not where the show was going. But I just don't like the idea. I mean, it would have been really interesting to see her win. Because what if she did become new Dr. Manhattan? She changed the world. Juan de la Cruz sends in a tip and says, hello, Rob. I've been an avid follower of you ever since the pandemic started, and I'm not sure if I could call myself part of the PGS yet, but it seems like a great group to be proud of, a part of. Anyways, do you have any favorite Filipino films? If yes, what are your favorites? You know what? That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know much about Filipino cinema. And I need to find more out about it. I will freely admit that is a hole in my knowledge. As a matter of fact, I know I've seen Filipino films, but I right off the top of my head, I can't tell you any, which is pretty horrifying. Hang on. I'm actually going to look because I know, you know what? I have to say it's like genre cinema. Let's see. And I know that there's one coming out that I'm dying to see. Yeah. I did, you know what? I thought that was Chinese. I did see a movie called Hello, Love, Goodbye. It's a romantic drama. But it's about two Filipino workers in Hong Kong. But I wouldn't say that's the best. Yeah, I got to delve into that. I can't give you an answer for that, unfortunately. And that is a shortcoming that I must admit to. But I need to get in. But there's a Filipino horror film that I'm dying to see. And let's see. Horror film 2019. I think it's 2019. And I read about this. Is it Almira? I think it's Almira. I don't know. There's one that's some possession movie that I'm dying to see, which I haven't seen. But I'm going to get back to you on that. I apologize. See, you've exposed a shortcoming in me. But I'll freely admit that. Johnny Stewart's here. He sends in a super chat and says, "Hey, dude, nice shirt. Talk soon." Johnny Stewart, a man I used to work with. We had fun making a commercial that aired on MTV for the Mirror's Edge EA video game. Cal from Swag Props is here, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Star Trek Day, says Cal. Have you heard of a wacky theory that posits our world was destroyed and was swallowed by a black hole when CERN discovered the Higgs boson in 2012 and everybody got shifted to an alternate dimension where things have gone down the drain since then? The state of modern Star Trek and Star Wars sequels sort of lend credence to that theory, don't you think? Could be. I'd like that, but we weren't destroyed. We're still here. But I think everything's going to be okay. Look, remember, as bad as things seem right now, we are still better off as a species than we've ever been. If you look at all the actuarial tables and you look at all the history of man, we're not doing so bad. I know it seems like we are doing bad, but we're not doing as bad. David Butcher sends in a tip. Thank you, sir. Aye, lassie. Keep that up and you'll earn your name. Star Trek 5. Yes, sir. David, thank you for sending that in. John is here. Hail, Rob. I'm 56, and some of my earliest moments are Star Trek episodes. My older brother loved the show, and it was something we could enjoy together. I loved Spock's brain in many of those Season 3 episodes. It still seems odd people disrespect Season 3. Well, season 3 has a lot of good episodes in it. I mean, you got the Tholian Web, you've got Day of the Dove. I've grown to like the Empath. And there are, I like All Our Yesterdays. I like Requiem for Methuselah. That Which Survives is weird. I don't know where that came from, but there's some decent. But then you get stuff like, look, And the Children Shall Lead is probably the worst episode of Star Trek ever made. I can't even deal with that. I mean, I'll watch Plato's Stepchildren. I even dig The Way to Eden. But man, And the Children Shall Lead, by God, is that hot garbage. But there's some good third season episodes. James LH sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. Star Trek Day makes me think of my late mum, who passed in 2013. She introduced me as a kid in the late 70s. She loved Star Trek and passed that to me more than my siblings. Plus, she would show me sci-fi films from the 50s. Kaiju films. You'd like her. I would like her. I'm sorry she's passed away. Have to add, though, that my dad, who passed last year, introduced me to his love of westerns and epics like Ben-Hur, Spartacus, Vikings, and classic martial arts movies. So I'm the product of some very different genres, which I've carried on in my own way." Well, it sounds like you had good parents. Both your parents were hipping you to these genre films. That's pretty awesome. A lot of people don't have that. I knew people growing up whose parents actively discouraged them from being involved in any kind of fandom. Crazy. Paul, our friend Paul in Long Beach, a funny man. A quick shout out to Star Trek the Animated Series, which debuted on September 8th, 1973. That is correct. I did not point that out. This was my entry point into Trek. Also, to any new members of the Post Geek Singularity, please do yourself a favor and read or listen to the Willow Yang reviews of Star Trek. Hopefully we're going to get all of those back up on the website. If you want to read Willow Talk, Willow Yang's letters about Star Trek will be up there. Not just about Star Trek, but about everything. That is her column. Eric Gant sends in a tip and says, in 2017, IDW announced an Aliens TNG comic that immediately canceled it. I'm not sure how I feel about xenomorphs in the Trek universe, but I get a childish chuckle thinking about the implications of our alien queen trying to tackle the Enterprise D. Yeah, I mean, that could be fun. I know what you're saying. The Enterprise, I see the joke you made there. The Enterprise, I get it. I get it. The alien queen attacking the Enterprise D. I'll grant you that. It's a terrible joke, but I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow it because that's the kind of jokes we like on this show. And when you're talking about dropping the D, why shouldn't it be the Enterprise D? I mean, if you think about it, compared to the sleek nature of, say, the Enterprise refit that I love so much, I mean, the Enterprise D, you know, for somebody, if the alien queen, if she is she's a queen, and if she's a size queen, the Enterprise D is a lot more robust. It's certainly thicker, rounder, longer, and faster than the Enterprise refit. So maybe for an alien queen, when you drop the D, it's got to be the Enterprise D. Just saying. But Eric, since you brought it up, I'll go with it. Also, Anonymous says, you missed 3 tips prior to the joke about how Disney is attempting to ruin cinema. Did I? I thought those were... oh, you know what? You're right. I did. You're right, Anonymous. I apologize. Let me go back. Rob, I've seen Tenet 3 times in IMAX. I'm writing in as Anonymous in the hopes of being able to write in under my usual name without being attacked by members of the Post Geek Singularity in the future, despite the inclusive nature of your group. You're my favorite YouTuber. Well, thank you. The reason, in my humble opinion, for the mixed reviews is that it's too complicated. It makes Inception and Memento seem like a children's bedtime story. If Nolan were to come out and explain everything behind the plot and story, well then, who knows? Also, Branna is absolutely terrifying. I wait with bated breath for your review. I can't wait to see this movie, but I don't like. Here's the thing: Elizabeth always criticizes me. She's like, sometimes you listen to your friends or you listen to other reviewers, and they affect your opinion. This is not true. This is not true. A lot of the time, I listen to people and that I respect, and I already know what I'm going to think about something if I've heard. And there are things that I've seen simply from the trailers when it comes to Tenet. There are things I know that might annoy me. And, like, I love Inception, Christopher Nolan. I love Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan. I did not like Interstellar, Christopher Nolan. I didn't. Tenet seems to have a little bit of what I don't like about Interstellar in it. And to me, it seems like I still don't understand the whole idea of inversion, and you're moving backward. How can you, if someone's moving forward or backward through time, I can't wrap my head around they're moving backwards, so time is literally backing up and they're being reversed. Well, then how could you be fighting with someone who's moving forward in time and you're moving backwards in time? It just seems I need to have it explained to me. As an astute viewer, I don't understand. So I'm sorry for missing Anonymous and missing those great comments. Darren McKinnon's here. Rob, you were you as disappointed as I was, and apparently as the Candyman himself was, with the way Kern's story ended in Deep Space Nine? Please pontificate. Yeah, to me, when Kern was introduced in Sins of the Father, Worf's brother was introduced in Sins of the Father, I thought they had a great relationship. I really liked all that, and I loved the Klingon War storyline, and I loved how Kern was dealt with. I felt that the relationship that Worf and Kern had should have gone all the way through the series and been. I liked their relationship, and I didn't like how it ended. Let me for the uninitiated, let's see. I'm going to read a little bit about Kern, so you know. So Kern, we didn't know Worf had a brother. Worf's parents were killed at the Khitomer outpost by a Romulan attack, and he was raised by the Rishenkos. So Kern and Worf were sons of Mogh. And here it says on Memory Alpha, Kern, son of Mogh, was a male Klingon in the 24th century and an officer in the Klingon Empire. He's biologically the son of Mogh and Worf's younger brother, but was raised by Lorg. His true lineage was not generally known until 2366, when Mogh was accused of being a traitor during the Khitomer massacre. Now, you find out all about this in Sins of the Father, which I think is one of the great episodes of TNG. I mean, it does more more for the Klingons. I thought it was great. I thought Sins of the Father, what it did for the Klingon culture, going to the Klingon homeworld, the whole thing about discommendation, you realize that there's all kinds of political machinations. I thought it was great, and I thought Kern was great as well. Now, what I don't like is that what happened in Deep Space Nine is that it was Gowron who, there's a lot going on, but Gowron expelled Kern from the High Council. He took his lands, the House of Mog's lands, and it was bad. So Kern, I'm going to read what they say here. Over the next 4 months, Kern oversaw the dissolution of the House of Mog. After this, he wandered as persona non grata in the Empire, unable to commit suicide, as it was considered a dishonorable mode of death. He finally arrived at Deep Space Nine in a drunken state. He asked Worf to restore his honor by killing him in the Mach Tavor ritual. Worf reluctantly agreed, but Jadzia Dax realized what Worf was about to do. I hated that he then later gets surgically altered, and they wiped his memory, and Kern gets a new identity. And I hated that. I hated what they did to Kern. I thought that it was unfair and stupid. And I wanted to see, I mean, it would have been really interesting to see Kern and Worf, after everything that had happened, together, sort of, especially after Martok, had the took over. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Worf and Kern ascend to, like, running the High Council together or something like that. I hated what they did at the end. It was really bad, and that was one of the only missteps, I think, that Deep Space Nine. I don't know why. I don't understand why. That's always been a lingering question. Justin Tonner's here. He says, Rob, you should have sent in a letter on Trek. Wait, hi, Rob. Should have sent in a letter on Trek instead of what I sent you last night. My gateway was TNG Season 1. First episode was Data Lore, and I was hooked. Jason Inman popped into the live chat and wished you happy Trek Day, and he likes your new glasses. Well, it's funny. One day I'm going to get real glasses. These glasses suck. I mean, these are plastic Amazon. We buy them by the box. They come like a box of 10 for like $5. One day I'm going to get, look, I got to get some Tom Ford rims, some readers that are good. But that way I've got to get my eyes fixed or checked or whatever. I got to do that anyway. Justin Tonner sends in a tip again and says, I'm excited. Tomorrow night, some friends and I are getting together to watch movies again. Per my suggestion, we're doing a Disney double feature of animated The Lion King in 4K on my friend's 4K TV, followed by The Black Hole. They haven't seen The Black Hole? No, 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 no. With that John Barry overture. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, they'll like it. Paul in Long Beach sends in a tip and says, Rob, today is a great day to give Pasadena some credit. Some of the biggest Star Trek fans in the world work just a couple of miles from where you're sitting. Americans whom study space for us every day. Hell, you can walk there, Rob. You are probably talking about JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You can't really walk. I mean, you could walk. I could ride my bike there in like maybe an hour and a half, but I don't think I could walk there. But I could definitely ride my bike. It's a great bike ride, too. Raymond Verada sends in a tip and says, Filipino film recommendations. On the Job and By Bust. Both action noir films by director Eric Maddie. General Luna by Jared Tarok, based on the Philippine story history with creative liberties. It's a sequel sister film. Goyo is a slower film. Well, that's good to know, Raymond. I will watch those. On the Job and By Bust. Action noir films. I love it. I'm in. Count me in. Those are good. I love recommendations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, members of this, the Post Geek Singularity community, however you identify across these 28 known galaxies, I'm bringing an end to this show. ROBServations 508. It's been a great show. Great letters, people. You never cease to amaze me. What great letters I got today for Star Trek Day. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. And if you want to write me letters, you can go to the Burnettwork.net website. Send me letters and videos. Tonight, as a special Star Trek Day, and Hassan Chavez, I understand, I feel your pain, on Whining About Movies, Elizabeth and I are going to be talking about Star Trek Generations. That's right. A movie spoiler alert, I don't like very much. But we're going to be talking about it tonight on Whining About Movies at, I don't know, did I say 7 o'clock, 7:30? Whining About Movies. Tonight, we will watch Star Trek Generations, and then we are going to resume our regular programming with Paul Newman in The Verdict tomorrow night. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's a double shot of Whining About Movies. So tonight, join us for Star Trek Generations for Star Trek Day. Because Elizabeth went all the way through the original series, and now she's halfway through Next Generation. But I figured we could skip ahead to Generations. It's okay. We're going to talk about Generations tonight for Star Trek Day, and we're going to watch Paul Newman in The Verdict for tomorrow. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle creatures, however you identify across 28 known galaxies, this is the end of ROBSERVATIONS 508. I want to thank my moderators. Robert Pariso is here. Greg Smith is here. Mr. Derringer is here. Haynock is here. The Richard is here. By God, it is a potpourri, a cornucopia of moderators. I want to thank them for all the work they do for this channel. And if you ever go over to the Post Geek Singularity Facebook page or the Whining About Movies Facebook page, you can talk to Richard. He's always running Zoom parties now. They're doing some crazy contest with creating cereal boxes, Raisin Shields, what B.L. Alley made. There's all kinds of crazy artwork coming in. It's a lot of fun. So that's cool. Go find him over there. And again, thank you for all the generous support, whether you're sending letters, whether you send tips or support the channel via Super Chats. Thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. And you know what? There's going to be some new shows coming down the pike that we're going to be doing. Elizabeth and I are going to be doing The Heart of Trek, A Couple's Guide to the Final Frontier, where we're going to talk about every single Star Trek episode. Not really so much a review, but we're just going to discuss them from the perspective of a man and a woman. What does that all mean? I don't know. We haven't done it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be fun. And we're also going to be doing the Free the Toys show, which I'm not really down with, but we're going to do it anyway. So, ladies and gentlemen, happy Star Trek Day. Go watch those festivities that CBS and Paramount are putting on for you. For the next 3.5 hours, go see your favorite Star Trek people. You know who you're not going to see? Marina Sirtis. Maybe she'll show up. Probably not, because they've done this. I'm sure it's pre-recorded. And William Shatner do not participate. Why, I don't know. It makes no sense. But you know what? You know what does make sense to me? What I think is important and what we should all remember as I sign off on ROBServations. As I say, every person you meet, remember, has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I'm going to give you William Shatner one more time.
Guys, you gotta mix a little reality in with your imagination to achieve happiness in your life. And you've got to overcome your programming, which in your case is a 30-year-old television show. I mean, come on. Let me tell you a story. I was jogging one evening around my neighborhood, and I came across a house on fire. And the crowd had gathered, and the fire engines hadn't come yet. And the crowd all turned to me and said, "Oh, look, there's Captain Kirk." And this guy came running over, turned out to be the father. And he said, Captain Kirk, my child's in the burning building. Please, you gotta save my kid. Please go." So what was I gonna do, argue with him? I was Captain Kirk. So I found myself running into the burning building. Now I'm looking for the kid, and it's the fire and the smoke and the heat. And I got down on my hands and knees because I had seen Rescue 911, and I was crawling around in the dark, and the smoke is in my lungs. I'm coughing. I can't see it, and I'm calling kid. Where are you, kid? No kid. Kid's not answering. I'm calling kid. Kid, no kid. And I'm dying. I mean, the flames are burning me up, so I gotta get out of there. So I'm coughing and hacking. The masonry's falling all around me, and I back out. And I get outside. And there I see the kid playing on the lawn. Kid had jumped out of the window. Father had caught him. He's playing on the grass. The father's fine. He's playing on the grass. The crowd is playing on the grass. The crowd all turn around looking at me. There's Captain Kirk. They're all laughing at me. I felt like such an idiot. And then I realized I'm not Captain Kirk. I'm not a hero. I didn't have the kid. I felt absolutely ridiculous. But I had to try.